Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mini Games. Today we are going to go over a top 5 list, an interesting topic of our top 5. I guess I would call, favorite, which is what you'd say favorite canceled games.
Maybe like most interested, or like most wanted. Because
I will say
my list is like 5 games. I was really like, I want to play that game.
2 of the games on my list were games I actually had reserved.
Yeah,
so
I don't think in my list, I don't think technically I could have reserved any of them. Maybe one.
Maybe one. There's one. Yeah, the one you're highlighting.
Yeah, maybe.
I feel like that was in the system at one time. So
sure.
But yeah,
there
were
been 2.
In
the system at fucking Game Crazy.
But back in the early days of like GameStop and even the end of Funkoland, like it didn't matter. Like any game that got announced, you could
Duke Nukem Forever was in the system for 20 years, however long it was, 15 years.
Well, I mean, you saw those stories going around. The game came out. The people that would come up with their old ass receipt from like decade,
or like their old like postcard or whatever. Yeah.
But we'll go ahead. We'll start with you, Dan. And with each of these are top 5. So we're starting with number 5.
So we're gonna start with number 5 from each of us. So my number 5 was a game which I only recently came to find it actually had a real name. It's a game called Marvel Chaos. It's an early like PS3 360 fighter. It was announced in like 2006, so it was definitely like towards the beginning of the system's life, especially PS3. But it eventually got canceled in November of 2007. The reason I was really interested in it, I want to say at one point I saw like a game trailer for it, where it showed it's basically a 3D Marvel fighter with, a roster of characters. I think the thing they showed off the most was like Captain America and the Hulk. And it was set in, I think they probably only ever had the one arena. I'm sure there were more. But it was like a New York City. But the thing that was cool about it was like the buildings were destructive. So like Hulk would punch Captain America and he would fly through a building and come out the other side.
Yeah.
And all that other kind of stuff. So it would definitely look like it would be something that was fun to play. How it actually would play or turn out is probably up in the air, especially given that this was a 3D fighter that they were releasing after that Marvel Rise of the Imperfects game, which was awful. Like that was a terrible game. Where I think that was Marvel and EA came up with like their own roster of heroes for that game, and they were the designs were complete shit. But so this looked like it was actually like a step forward in that direction, and it never made it beyond like the first year of being like announced. And I want to say that not too long ago, like the footage of it actually got like released and put out
in the last year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you can go watch some fights and see some of the other characters and stuff that were going to be in it. Like obviously Spider-Man was in it, but I think they were going to have like Dark Phoenix was confirmed. There's a lot of like screenshots and stuff available for it. I think one of the things I liked a lot about it too is it was very comic book looking, where like there were like comic panels and stuff like that.
Yeah, because this would have been right before the Marvel like Disney era,
right before it,
and that's probably a big factor in why it was canceled.
I would assume that was a reason why it got shut down. I want to say it was EA Chicago, and then that studio got closed.
Okay.
Because they were the guys that made Fight Night, I want to say, and Def Jam.
And
they eventually like moved those things out of there and then canceled, and then they shut down.
So they would have been the people that probably made Fight Night Round 3.
I would assume so.
Which was the better one.
And then after that they moved 4 out of there, I'm sure.
Okay.
And then 4 did it. And that was just a game that I was super interested in. You go look at it now, it looks real fucking rough, but I'm assuming it's
part of that is it's alpha footage.
Is beta stuff. It's probably all alpha. But yeah, it's cool. You can go see plenty of clips from it. Kind of a bummer. And then we've never really gotten one since. It's just all been Marvel versus Capcom stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so that's number 5.
And that would have been cool. And that was in that same era where you had like the Ultimate Alliance games.
Mm-hmm.
The first.
Well, that was part of the problem, I think, is everybody had Marvel rights and stuff and would use all these alliances, all this stuff. But maybe it was spread too thin. But
yeah,
probably. My number 5 is actually a more famous one. I think people are a little more familiar with, which is Star Wars 1313. Which looked awesome at the time that they announced it, because I think it was announced like, what was that, like 2012? It was it was like probably a year and a half before we would have gotten Xbox One and PS4. And it was one of the first like truly next gen looking games. So like it looked incredible at the time it was revealed. The thing that the reason it was canceled is because Disney bought Star Wars. So
Right.
that's what killed it. And it was like one of the last things that was being made in that era before Disney took over. And when Disney took over, their first thing was they killed everything that was in production.
Yeah,
Star Wars
it was like
related.
a complete like teardown and restart.
But that game looked awesome. You played it was bounty hunter related, so it wasn't going to be your typical like every time you see a Star Wars game, you typically think it's going to be Jedi and lightsabers and stuff. And that's what made this cool. Because I mean, even look since that in the Disney era, what have we gotten video game wise, other than like one bad and one okay Battlefield game? We got a Jedi game, 2 of them.
Yeah. No, well, I mean,
so
I think the thing is I think that ends up being the thing people want to do the most.
It is
lightsabers and throwing.
We did
stuff
get that
around.
Star Wars Outlaws game, but that's bad for other reasons. It wasn't
Right.
ready to go. Although at some point I want to look at it. At some point when it is the right $20 price, I will take a look at that game. Because I'm sure now with 800 patches, it's probably okay. So, but
Yeah.
it probably is, right? Anything would be at that point. But yeah, Star Wars 13, it was cool. It looked awesome. It was the first true like look at the time of like, here's what the next generation is going to look like. And that was a lot more interesting because that at the time that was coming off of the longest console generation we ever had, which
Yeah.
I mean, 360 era was 8 years. So, but that's also like probably one of the most famous canceled ones. So, but that's my number 5. But you, Matt?
I think for me, the Getaway 3 was the one. I was into the Getaway games. I thought they were an interesting premise to them. And again, when I was younger, I didn't really have a computer or internet, so I wasn't really like dedicated into like what they were like, what games were doing and stuff like that. I just kind of based it on like when I got like my gaming magazines to what would show on there. So I remember getting the Getaway and playing that and thinking it was just a pretty solid game in itself, and playing 2 was pretty good. So I mean, when I had heard that they were going to do a 3, I was peaked, but like, I mean,
would that have
They
still
never-
been in the PS2 era, or would that have pushed it to PS3?
from what I saw, it was, I think it was the PS3.
It would have had to
actually,
been
hold on.
PS3 by the end of it.
Because it was Getaway. Then Getaway 2 wasn't called 2; it was called Black Monday, right?
Right, but
Okay.
three would have had to have been a PS3 game by that point because Black Monday was towards the end of that system.
Okay.
Yeah. So from what I see here, it says it would have been released on the PS4 and then some future
Oh, wow.
PlayStation system, and not the PS3.
Damn.
So that's what they were eyeballing it for the 2017. But I mean,
significantly later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by that point, it's too late.
I don't
yeah,
know. I think there would be an audience of people that would have been excited in a nostalgia way for
Possibly.
Getaway 3.
That would be like all the
Yeah.
people who like Mafia would probably
Yeah, exactly.
would play that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
and I enjoyed Mafia. I mean, but it was
Yeah.
it is hit or miss too. You know what I mean? Like it's a niche for certain people.
It's
that
not
do
for
it.
everybody. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, Dan. What about your number 4?
Number 4, easy one.
It's a big one.
The big one, Time Splitters 4. A game that was always talked about and just never quite materialized for tons of reasons. After a certain point, it was just like one thing after the other kept that game from being
Yeah.
made. And it was, I think right after Time Splitters, because you got to remember, like Time Splitters 3 is an Xbox and PS2 game. It's like that's
Was
the
it?
last we ever got. We never got even a PS3, like an early PS3 or 360 game.
No.
So you have to think
Yeah.
that at that point they were like, all right, we should definitely do something like this for these next gen systems, or even like a Wii game. I could have seen it being on a Wii,
Yeah.
because they were just
Mhm.
GameCube games as well. But like, so it was announced, and then it was like, well, we're not really, but then maybe we're working on it, and then they made Haze, and Haze was just
Haze
bombed.
was kind of the nail in the coffin for that
yeah,
studio,
for
right?
Free Radical,
Yeah.
just in general.
Yeah.
And then they got bought up by Crytek and rebranded, and then Time
Okay.
Splitters was just like put on hold forever.
I never
and then
played Haze.
And then at some point, I want to say at some point, those guys even started work on Star Wars Battlefront 3, because remember there was like leaked concept art for that came out after a certain point.
Yeah.
But you know, then that studio just kind of sputtered. It did nothing, and then I think, what does it say here? Oh, then that
they were
studio
trying to get something off the ground later.
Yeah, like would they ever make one? I don't know. And they would always say like, well, we're not going to say that we're not making it, but we can't actually say that we're making it.
Yeah.
And then that studio got shut down. And then in a couple years ago, I want to say like 5-6 years ago, concept art got released for it.
Mm-hmm.
So like it was further along than maybe you thought it was. And then they like restructured at one point, and like Free Radical kind of came back, and they were gonna make it, and then it was like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it. And then Koch Media like had bought Time Splitters, saying they were gonna make it through Deep Silver, and then it was just like, you know, just like one thing after the other.
Yeah.
And then finally, like I think it was only like a year and a half ago where like they were like, we're gonna shut Free Radical, maybe not, and then finally it was just like, it's over.
Yeah.
And so like the studio's gone, the franchise is gone. It's just fucking over.
The best thing we got was we got those re-releases, you know. Of
and those are good, but those are PS2 games on a PS5, and they're not changed in any way. I was just playing some of Time Splitters 1 today. It's pretty rough. But yeah, Time Splitters 4 would be a game that I would love. I think there's room for it to come back now, but
there is.
It's never going to come. It's gone. It's dead. If Koch Media owns it, it's over.
I always forgot that Haze.
Embracer Group. They're even worse. It's over.
I always forgot that Haze was something that they made, because that was exclusive to PS3, right?
Yes, it was, and that's why I was actually excited for it. I was like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
You know what? That's not. You know what? And you know what? Actually, else is true. The last time we got Time Splitters it's in Homefront Revolution.
Yeah.
Remember, it came out that guy secretly put the entire fucking game in there.
Yeah.
And so you could just go one of those machines and put in a code and unlock it and play it. So like, we have an HD version of it in Homefront.
I forgot about that.
Time Splitters is dead, which is a bummer.
It's a bummer.
Yeah.
Number 4 for me is from the Xbox One era. Another kind of more famous one, and that is of course Scalebound. Everybody remembers Scalebound. Yeah. Everybody was excited about Scalebound. It was announced in 2013. It was going to be a collaboration with Platinum, and that's why people are excited about it. Makers of Bayonetta, going to have its, you know, there would be their own exclusive franchise for Microsoft. Canceled in 2017. So it's surprisingly like not that far after it was canceled, like compared to some other things. But that game looked cool. You remember that first rad trailer with the guy and the dragon and him putting on his headphones?
His Beats headphones?
His Beats,
sick music?
His Beats headset, yeah.
Cool.
The game looked cool, though. Like, and it definitely, it would have filled an interesting void, I think, at that time. But I think the thing that people always forget about in the early days of the Xbox One was that there were a lot of, like, they had a lot of exclusive games in the beginning. And they really pushed, you know, until we got to the era we're in now, where like we just bought all these studios and are mismanaging them. That early era of the Xbox One, you know, with like Sunset Overdrive and like Dead Rising 3 and like a lot of that stuff, there were a lot of exclusives. So, and this could have been something, but unfortunately, it went by the wayside. Always thought it looked cool though, and was excited. And yeah, it was specifically it would have been from the team that made Bayonetta. So
okay,
which would have been cool because I'm sure part of the reason it fell apart too is because that team was working on Bayonetta 2, and the Bayonetta 2 came out, was that like 2014, like end of that year. So, and I'm sure that had a hand in kind of putting a nail in the coffin of this game, but it was always a bummer because. I mean, there are definitely other games that got canceled in the Xbox One, PS4 era, but that was always one of the bigger ones because I remember the reason is because I remember every time we get to an E3 before it got canceled, that was like the number one thing that people would ask to see a trailer for.
It would always come up. Yeah,
it always came up. So it was a bummer when it got canceled, but that's number 4 for me. How about you, Matt?
So it's kind of dumb, but Tremors, the game.
I don't remember this one at all.
So it was just like one of those things where From what I saw, it was announced back in August of 2002. Um, let me see. I had it pulled up and then the window closed on me. And it was supposed to be released on, from what I saw, everything: Xbox, GameCube, PS2, and Windows.
Okay.
So it was a single player, third person survival horror action game, essentially what it was. And you were battling the graboids and the shriekers. Don't ask me why it was interested. Maybe it was because it was Tremors, and Tremors was one of those dumb movies that used to pop up on TV and I used to be entertained by.
I love that movie.
It was such a good one.
I know.
Number one.
It's
Once you get to
terrible.
Tremors 18, it was horrible.
I think I check out after 2. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, man. I think there's an interesting thing when you take movies and make them into games. Like, they're normally always bad, the ones that do actually get released or put out. But I don't know. I think playing a Tremors game where essentially the whole point is for you to not be touching the ground and making noise.
Yeah.
Would be kind of an interesting concept. I
It would
don't
be.
know how essentially you would play out because, I feel like what was I don't know. I just feel like when it comes to sound and stuff now, it's hard because you can't really everything you do makes noise, and that's the whole point behind these movies is literally you can't make any noise, you can't make a step, you can't do anything because they're gonna feel your your vibrations and your sound from the ground. So it's interesting. Not saying that would have been a perfect game, not saying anything would have been fantastic about it. I do just say it would be interesting to just check out. So it's number 4.
All right. So number 3 for me, Kyle, you might remember this one. I don't know if a lot of people do because it never really got super far, but this is an Xbox MMORPG on the original Xbox, right as Xbox Live was starting to take off. And they were kind of exploring what they could do with Phantasy Star and Mech Assault and all that kind of stuff. There was a game called True Fantasy Live Online. And I was very into the idea of this because I was very into MMOs at the time, like Final Fantasy 11. But what I really loved about this is that it was made by Level 5, which are the guys that make Dark Cloud and Rogue Galaxy and even stuff like Professor Layton. And they did stuff for Dragon Quest 9 on the DS. They've done a lot of incredibly solid games. Most of the stuff they do now is Japanese, but they did all the yokai games and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
The Ni no Kuni game.
Yeah, they did all they make really good shit. So I was very excited about this. It was just one of those things where you play online and you could have a job and you could just run around and play for hours and just do stuff with other people. And then eventually it just kept being well, it's delayed, and they wouldn't talk about it. And, this is back, we're talking 2003, 2004, where you didn't get gaming news all day, every day. It was drip fed.
This would have been something I would have read in EGM or something. Yeah.
I remember it being in
GamePro.
GamePro, I want to say, is the one I can remember it being in.
That was my jam.
And, it just got to the point where it was just eventually canceled because it was delayed so much. And Xbox wasn't big in Japan was probably a huge reason why, because it was very Japanese. Because again, that company focuses on making that kind of stuff. But there's still screenshots out there you can see. It was one of those things where I definitely, especially because it was so early in the Xbox Live days, I would have been super into it because I was playing anything I could on Xbox Live, Mech Assault, Dead or Alive, any of that kind of stuff. This would have just been a fun, to have an MMO easily play on a console that wasn't a bad version of FF11 on PS2 or the bad version of FF11 on Xbox. It would have been fun. And you never really heard much about it. And Microsoft was one of those things where it was we're done. Moving on. Bummer.
Yeah. Number three for me is another pretty famous one. One of the 2 on this list that I actually had reserved at one point. That is StarCraft Ghost, which is a pretty famous one. The thing that's a little more unusual with this one is that I had forgotten this. There was actually a prequel novel that came out with the backstory of the character you were going to play as. So it was announced in 2002, Originally, it was slated to be on those three systems of that era, so GameCube, Xbox, PS2.
Okay.
And then it was going to get pushed to 360 and PS3 and that kind of thing. It fell off like in 2006, like right after that novel was published. Basically, it fell off, and then they didn't officially announce that it was canceled. I didn't realize this until just now. They didn't officially come out and say like, "Hey, this game's canceled. We're not doing it," until 2014. Like, think about that. It just, I mean, you kind of assumed,
Right.
But yeah, they never came out and officially said like, "Hey, we're not making this game."
That's
Until
crazy.
then, which is a long time. But it was completely different. It wasn't a strategy game. It was going to be a third person, like kind of like a stealth game. You played as one of the character's name was Nova. She's a psychic espionage operative called a ghost. Would have been set 4 years after the conclusion of StarCraft Brood War. So this is before, obviously, StarCraft 2 came out. It covered a conspiracy about the secretive military project conducted by Nova's superiors and the Imperial Terrain Dominion. But there's very little like about the actual story of the game that has come out. It's just been that prequel novel, which again deals more with the character than it does like what the game was going to be. It was a very like, I remember the trailer because obviously like they had a trailer for it and stuff. But it was very popular. Like people were excited about it. And like I said, there was a time where I was able to reserve it. So I had it reserved. I think the only reason, because I had reserved it like pretty much when it got announced, but like the only reason I didn't keep that reservation is because in 2004 is when I moved from Michigan back to Illinois. And I just didn't re-reserve that game.
That makes sense.
Because it just was kind of like, I don't know what's going on with that. And but yeah, there was a period of time where I had that game reserved in the system at GameStop, and I'm sure a lot of people did. But an interesting one that there's, and even in an era now, like there's been a couple times like maybe they could revisit something with that idea, but I don't know.
I don't even know what I mean, StarCraft is going to be a weird thing for them now. Like, I just don't even know how invested they are in the idea of StarCraft.
It's in a very weird spot right now. A lot of that stuff is just because of what's going on with now Microsoft.
I feel like you don't hear about StarCraft or even like World of Warcraft anymore.
No, the only thing that we've heard in the last year is, there's been kind of a push from the Xbox community to get World of Warcraft on console.
It's insane to me that it's still.
And there have been times where you think like, oh, they're kind of teasing it, but they haven't pushed to actually do it. I think the problem now is I think there'd be too much work because it is a game from a completely different era than we're in now. And that's been going for 20 years.
At that point, the easiest thing to do would be you're just emulating it. But at that point, why am I bothering?
And I think the other thing is I would imagine they probably crunch the numbers and go, all right, realistically, how many people are we going to get on the console space that would care about this?
And the thing is how many people are we going to get that are new subscribers on the Xbox? It's not about just people who already subscribed playing it on the system. It's about how many people are going to be enticed to sign up for it.
I don't think you would get a single PC user to move to a console to play that.
That would be insane if you did.
That wouldn't make sense.
Get it.
You might get one that tries it out of curiosity, but to completely move to a console, that's not going to happen. So, and they're not in the same spot as they were now with 14, Final Fantasy 14. So 14 that's kind of like the big gun in town.
Final Fantasy 14 is still, I think that's got to be the preeminent one.
That's got to be the biggest gun in town now. Yeah.
It has to be. It's the only one you keep hearing about.
It's the only one I hear about. I don't hear people talk about World of Warcraft anymore. So
not really.
Not at the level that it once was.
14 is still killing it, man.
Yeah, not my thing. So, what about you, Matt? What you got for number 3?
I'm gonna go with. So I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro. Like, his movies are interesting, but I really like the way he does his like creatures. His creature setups are pretty cool and they're kind of elaborate. So Sundown was a game apparently he was tied to, and from what I read about it, it's essentially a horror game. It was supposed to be released on PS3 and 360.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it says it would take place where players would have to survive an apocalypse while fighting against zombies. And it says that Del Toro said the game would be similar for Left 4 Dead. So I don't know to like what extent. There's not like a lot of information on it, so I don't know to what extent it would be. But I mean, Left 4 Dead had a pretty decent following from what I've seen. Uh, I just think his monster ideas will probably be kind of elaborate to actually see what he could do, like from movie to video game. I would think he'd be able to have a little more play in that. So I mean, I don't know, not much on it, but I think it piqued my interest, and it's just interesting to see.
I don't even think there was like really a trailer for it, was there? I think it just was kind of something he spoke about wanting to do.
From what I saw, there really wasn't much to it. Like there really wasn't like a big information as far as it goes. I don't really think much got on the plan except for them just talking about it. But I don't know. I mean, we'll see if he would. I don't think he's done anything. I can't even think if I've seen anything of his.
No, because at some point he got working with Kojima and got sucked in, because originally they were going to do the Silent Hills game. That was the PT demo. What that was going to be, that got canceled. Now he's part of Death Stranding, and then I thought he had something to do with that Xbox OD game, but no, that's Jordan Peele was who's helping him on that. So he's, what's funny is I don't think Del Toro is really involved in Death Stranding 2. Like he hasn't been in any of the trailers, and I haven't heard anything.
I haven't heard him talked about it.
And he was a big part of the first game, so like he was literally a character there in the game. So I haven't heard anything, so I don't know. But that's the last thing I kind of heard of him. He's kind of been doing movie stuff, because he's got that Frankenstein movie coming to Netflix this year.
I was gonna say, Pinocchio dropped. Pinocchio was his last film back in 2022.
That was a Netflix thing too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'll go back and watch that. I haven't seen that. I saw like Pan's Labyrinth and what was it? The Orphanage. Is that what it was?
He did The Orphanage, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And then
I think
Pan's
so.
Labyrinth.
Yeah. And I mean, I enjoyed both of those. And then I know he worked on the Hellboy, and that, I mean,
he did both Hellboy 1 and 2, I think.
Yeah. So I mean,
the one that I always liked that he did, he remade like a 70s made-for-TV horror movie called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
Oh, yeah?
And I don't know if you've ever seen that, but like the creature work he has in that movie is pretty good. It's like about these weird creatures that live in the basement of this house.
Uh-huh.
It's worth watching.
Interesting.
So
maybe
it was one of the, I'll say this, the reason I remember that movie, it's the first movie I watched when I broke my thumb years ago, and I couldn't play. I broke my thumb right when I think Assassin's Creed, Witcher 2 was coming out for the 360. And then I couldn't play any games. I broke my thumb. So that was a movie that was randomly on Netflix at the time that I watched. So, but that's a cool one. So, but yeah, I agree with you. He's always done really cool things with like creatures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He has a good concept for that. He also has that show that's on Netflix that I should watch. That's like Cabinet of Curiosities or something like that, I think it's called. Looks
I know
cool.
what you're talking about.
And it's in my list. I should watch it at some point. But and again, that would be the reason why I would watch it. So
yeah.
But that's a good one.
Interesting one for sure.
Dan, you got a hot number 2.
So this was the big one that I thought that maybe at some point it could have been reservable, and I want to say maybe in Game Crazy it was.
I think it was.
Yeah. But this one is Rockstar's Agent, which was a game that was announced all the way back in like 2007. It was like kind of teased, and I think it was formally announced in 2009. This was a place. I remember the big thing about this was like this was PS3 exclusive. It was going to be set in like the Cold War, and you were going to be, a counterintelligence agent and doing like, missions and assassinations and all that kind of stuff. Everything they ever said about it sounded cool, and like because it was Rockstar, like you trusted it was going to be good. Because we're talking this is post, San Andreas Rockstar type stuff.
Oh yeah.
So they've been established by this point, and it was just that kind of game where it just never materialized. It was talked about for years, and then it was delayed, and then they'd release something else like LA Noire, and then they would talk about it, and then it would be delayed and not talked about, and then they'd release GTA 4, and then it was like always the thing that was there, but it never quite seemed real.
I want to say the last time I remember them speaking about it was like right after GTA 4 came out.
Right, and I think part of the reason why the game finally just like disappeared was because at that point they had to understand that it's like, look, we either try to make this thing or we just go all in on GTA 5, which we know is going to be a huge deal. And doesn't it make more sense at this point to just take anybody who might be on Agent to just make them make GTA 5?
Yeah.
And, and then that was kind of done. It says here the last thing about it was I remember this happening, but the trademark for it got renewed twice. And then eventually it was just abandoned and it was just gone forever. So that was always kind of a bummer one because, I'd like to see what Rockstar could do something like that.
Something else.
Yeah, I mean, and it just seems now we're locked into Grand Theft Auto and maybe a Red Dead every 10 years.
Maybe a Red Dead, yeah.
Like, they've, LA Noire, Kyle knows, is like one of my favorite games. But even that got... sold well and was a great game, and like
that was also a different team that made that. Didn't they just publish that?
Sure, but it was still part of like the brand.
It was. I don't think that team exists anymore.
No, it's gone. They got shut down because there was, I think, for a short time. Maybe this will be 2A. For a short time, there was like an LA Noire 2.
Yeah,
which was supposed to be set, I think, in like the 20s in like Shanghai or something, and it was called something like Horror of the Orient or something weird. And that was a game where it's like I'm automatically, but that was quickly like gone and just forever. So it's a bummer that Rockstar they should just rename themselves Grand Theft Auto Studios at this point because that's all they're ever gonna make again. It's over. Red Dead 2, like someone who's never finished it because it would just always felt like too much. I still appreciate it, but it even feels like Red Dead's probably off the table for the future.
I think it really honestly depends. I would imagine they take a massive break after GTA 6 comes out.
But 6 is going to take up so much resources to maintain, and they're going to want to make new content for that game for a decade. And like, they're so locked in on Grand Theft Auto as the franchise.
But that content's all going to be multiplayer stuff too, though.
Yeah,
but that's what I'm saying. Though. At best, you get Grand Theft Auto 6, Tokyo or something like that. You know what I mean? Where it's built on the same engine but is a different game. And I feel like maybe that's what they're going to do. So, Agent was one I just always wanted to know more about, and there was just almost nothing ever got released on the game, which is crazy. But so that's number 2.
I have another Rockstar game at number 2 for me. And that is one that I would have really wanted that will never happen, and that is Bully 2. Bully, one of my favorite games of all time. Would love to see a sequel to that. I think now in the era that we live in, I don't think that somebody would greenlit a Bully sequel. It's just the idea and the concept of what like the game, like even
stuff,
even like taking yourself out of knowing what the game is about. Like really, the average person, you say like, "Hey, we're making a video game about being a bully." That's not going to really fly in 2025. So
not at all.
But that game was in long development. I mean, we've known for a while they had greenlit it, and the most recent information we got, which was in 2019, is that they had worked on that game for 18 months before canceling it. So at some point, I feel like footage of that will leak, and we'll see like what it was going to look like. But it more or less it was something that was canceled to get those people working on Red Dead 2. So, but there was a time and a place where after Red Dead and after GTA 5 that they were in production of making a Bully 2 as their next thing before abandoning that and going back to Red Dead 2. It's kind of weird when I think about it. Like we got Red Dead 1, we got GTA 5, and then the next thing they made after that was immediately a sequel to Red Dead. So, but again, Bully, one of my favorite games of all time. And like, yeah, you are a bully in the game. There's a lot more to it than just that. Like there's a pretty good story going to that character. But yeah, I mean, part of the game is you are a bully, you can do those kind of things, and I just think in 2025 that like that would be like that would go nuclear. Like
Oh yeah.
a viral thing where like people would get really upset about a game like that. So I don't think you'll ever see that franchise return. I think it's a one and done thing, unfortunately. But it's
Just
crazy to
enjoy
think
what you
about.
got.
And I like and like I said, I would love to see footage of that league just to see what it was gonna look like. So but that's number 2 for me. And the other thing I'll say is like you can play Bully Scholarship Edition backwards compatible on Xbox right now, and that's a great game that
I got that.
anybody
I need
should
to start
play.
playing it back again.
It's really great. I have 100% that game 4 times, so very big fan. What about you, Matt?
So for me, my number 2 is Tekken X Street Fighter, however they wanted to word it.
I remember this game.
So I don't like. I didn't really read a lot about what it was. I mean, essentially, I'm a big Tekken fan, and my friend is a big Street Fighter fan. So it was like the one game where we thought we'd be able to play together, and it'd be really cool to just kind of get together and be able to play the characters we like from the franchises. Reading into it, it said this game was announced at the 2010 Comic-Con in San Diego, and I didn't know that. Personally, I don't know. I think fighting games where they mix people are really cool. I really like the Marvel vs. Capcom
Those are
games.
good
I
games.
think those are super enjoyable. The older ones, of course. I mean, a lot of people didn't like, what was it, Marvel vs. Capcom Ultimate?
The new there was Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which was okay.
Yeah.
It was that more recent one.
There's
like
Infinite.
Infinite.
Is like
It's the
Thank
one
you.
that people
I
don't
couldn't-
like.
Yeah, that's like
Yeah.
4.
Yeah, that game is not great.
I did not play that.
Not
one
at all.
very much. I did not like that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hit or miss, but I know the older games of those are pretty fun, and I think honestly this would have been a banger.
Well,
had they-
the thing about this one was it was meant to be like the companion piece to the Street Fighter Cross Tekken game.
yeah,
So the point was Tekken characters in a Street Fighter game, and then Street Fighter characters in a Tekken game. And that's why I
Exactly.
was with you, where like I really wanted to see if someone
How
could
that's
finally
handled.
make a good 3D Street Fighter game. Because it just seems like that would be an impossible task given like the powers and stuff that they had.
yeah,
But yeah, in a Tekken world, that could have been pretty cool. Like, I mean, Tekken is
For sure.
one of the few like premier fighting games still going and still making
Yeah.
good versions of stuff. So, yeah, damn, that'd be
Is it-
something I'd still like for them to come back. Now, I mean, there are Street Fighter characters in Tekken. Akuma's in the fucking game. Like,
yeah.
I think Street Fighter 6 was pretty well received. I'm not a Street Fighter person, so
I've never really tried it. I need to go get into it now
Um,
that
I'm a Mortal Kombat person.
I was
so.
put off. I was put off by all of the. Well, here's how the characters and there's a season. It's like that one. It just seemed overly complicated.
That
at
seemed
the time.
overly complicated.
So I
Kind
was
of like
I'll
5.
wait. Yeah, I'll wait until maybe
5
they
was
figure
the-
this shit out.
5 was PS4 exclusive, right? That was the big
No.
deal with that one.
Was it?
I think it was 5. 4 was on everything, but I think 5 specifically.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
It was exclusive. And
You're right.
Again, I'm not a Street Fighter person. I'm Mortal Kombat and DOA. So.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not huge into Street Fighter. I played the original 1, 2, and I think Turbo was kind of where I stopped. I wasn't a fan of 5. I didn't like the way how that was going. One of my best friends bought, like I said, he's a big Street Fighter fan, so he has like everything. And I mean, he bought 6, and I mean, he seemed to enjoy it from what I know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're fun games, they really are, but it's like, if you don't play those games religiously, you just don't know how, you just go back to the people you do know how to play, and most of the time
Yeah.
people are playing Ryu and Ken. So it's kind of like, I mean, for me in Tekken, I loved Law and Lee and the one guy's name I never know how to pronounce, Haorong or whatever.
Orang.
Thank you. And then if I wanted to just be a jerk, Paul, I think, was the one, because I always knew his super, and you could just set people up and just pow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it would have been interesting to see, especially like you said, if they were to do it 3D style, how that would play out, especially with Street Fighter characters, because everybody's got power ups. So, I mean, nothing we'll get to see ever in the future, but who knows? Maybe.
Hey man, if you're talking Puzzle Fighter now, I can
Hold
talk
up.
to you about that. Yeah, like that one, I could talk to you about
Puzzle
that.
Fighter, I'm back.
Yeah. DOA was the only one that I really got like so deep into that you could. I mean, we were at that point of counting frames and stuff. Like it got ridiculous for 5 specifically. So, but that game, that's an incredible fighting game.
There are some fighting games where I've gotten pretty deep. Tekken.
That's
4,
probably the deepest for me.
Tekken 4, my friends and I got real fucking deep into Tekken 4, where we were looking up, every combo and like practicing 10 hits and all that kind of like for hours.
The only other one I'd say like even recently would be 15 years ago is when Mortal Kombat first came back. So Mortal Kombat 9.
Oh yeah,
I'm really into that. Where like 10 was okay, 11 was probably the best it has been since it came back, and then we talked recently about 1 was disappointing. So
you know what? I just real quick, I remember now. So you went to Soul Calibur 2 was probably the one I was the most into.
Yeah,
I
was a big Soul Calibur person too until 3.
3 is weird. As a big Soul Calibur guy, 3 is very weird.
I did play 4.
4 is okay. 5's pretty good. 6 is okay.
I did not play 6.
2 is a phenomenal game.
2 is the best one.
And like when they redid that HD thing for like the Xbox,
that's cool.
Immediate play. I used to go to the arcade specifically to play Soul Calibur 2, like competitively. I was I don't brag about being good at a lot lot Soul Calibur 2 is probably top 3 all time of me
all the
being
way
just
back
better
the original Soul Blade.
Oh, the original
PS1. Yeah, I used to rent that. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at you name dropping.
Yeah.
But Soul Calibur 2 is a hell of a game.
Incredible game. Just remake that. Don't make SC7. Make that.
Remake that.
Yeah.
You got a hot number 1.
Last one for number 1.
You got our hot number 1.
This is one I always bring up as like a joke, but I mean it. It was Frame City Killer. This it's funny because I think had this game actually come out, it probably would have been bad.
Probably wouldn't work the way that you.
No, just the way you would hope, because we're talking. This is early 360 like announce and launch. I want to say this was even on like a trailer for it was on some kind of like promo disc for the 360.
Okay,
like showing stuff off.
Probably was.
I remember the trailer like specifically, but it was basically almost like an open world. I say open world, but it was like in like a city kind of a thing, like a Hitman game, where you were a secret agent. You had to hunt down a guy who was like a drug lord, and they made it sound like you could it was one of those games where like you could kind of play it your way and you can kind of do different stuff. Maybe almost even like Crackdown ended up being, where it was like kind of do it the way you want to. But this seemed almost more like a Hitman style game. I remember the visuals for it being very good, but then back in 2005 and 6 we were blown away by a lot of stuff. And it just was one of those things where like it got delayed a couple times and it never really showed up again after that initial thing. And I think there was even like first impressions things that were bad. Namco was the people who made it. They finally just said fuck it and they just canceled it. But that's one I always joke about, because it was one of the first like big, this is a 360 only new system, big deal, like we're making it for this. And it just never materialized. even a game like Dark Sector. Remember, Dark Sector was like the first 360 game ever announced.
Yes.
And eventually, that game even actually finally came out. It was nowhere even close to what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, it looked completely different.
Originally, I want to say you had like a staff and everything, and then by the end, you ended up with that like glaive. But even that game made it. It just wasn't the game.
Went under an extreme change.
Probably wasn't Dark Sector anymore.
Yeah.
But so Frame City Killer is always kind of my fun number 1 to pop off.
Number 1 for me is the other one that I did have reserved at the time. It was going to be on the Dreamcast of everything.
Ooh.
And
reserved for a Dreamcast game. That's a baller.
I will say in that like year period that I was into the Dreamcast and had one, I was in on that system.
I don't blame
hard in on it. So everything I played everything.
When I got mine like third party from a guy who was moving out of the country after like 6 months, and he gave me 2 controllers, VMU, 6 games. That was probably the only system I played for like a year. I rented everything I could. Like
I went and bought that Dreamcast from that mom and pop shop that we had where I lived at the time, and like I didn't look back.
Yeah.
The others is like I had a PS1 and I would have had a PS1 and a 64 at the time. Like those just collected dust. Well, and the thing too is like at the time, the one friend of mine that I had, because I went to private school and we carpooled with him, and in the middle of when I was going to school, his parents got divorced, and his dad, that was for whatever reason, that was the thing he went out and got like at remember the launch date 99 whatever
99 man.
He went and bought him. He bought like awards. He went and got it. He bought bought like every launch game, all the stuff that so like I was already thought the system was cool as hell, but it didn't sell me on getting one until Resident Evil Code Veronica was announced.
Yeah,
that was
I never really thought about buying one until the guy. We were literally at work, and the guy was from England, and he's like, "I'm leaving in like a week, so I got to sell a whole bunch of stuff." And he said, "Oh, I've got this Dreamcast and stuff." I said, "Like, what do you want for it?" And it was like the thing, 6 games, 2 controllers, 2 like I was going to be set up. He's like, whatever, man, like $150. It's like, I'll have it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sold.
Yeah. Like, because at the time I would have had to buy a new system. All this shit would have been
a lot more than that.
Yeah. So, hell yeah.
And I, like I said, so I was in on that system at the time. And I mean, even today, probably I'd say, gun to the head, probably Castlevania would probably be my favorite franchise of all time. So
Makes
Castlevania
sense.
Resurrection, which I was going back and looking at it now, like Castlevania 64 is not a very good game. The other 64 game, which is behind me on the shelf there, is basically the same game with a different character and one new level. So that's all, and that was Blockbuster exclusive.
Right.
But at the time, I loved Castlevania 64. I thought it was awesome. I played a lot of it. And then obviously I'd played that. I had gotten a PS1, played a bunch of Symphony of the Night, was all in. And I grew up with Castlevania. Like I started with 3 and then worked backwards and then played in the Super Nintendo. So I had played them all. But I remember flipping through a magazine. It probably was EGM. I don't remember what, but I would assume it's probably EGM because that was the one that I had a subscription to besides Game Informer. And I remember the ad, and it looked awesome. And it was like, okay, this is in 3D, but this looks a lot better than a 64 game, you know? So, and I was fully in, and I remember going and reserving it or whatever at that store at that time. And then I want to say, I don't think I got a phone call about it, but I remember one of the times we went in to buy something else. That's how I found out. It wasn't through a magazine. I wouldn't have been really on the internet that much as a kid at this time. We went into the store, and it was kind of thing where we went to buy something, and it was told to me like, oh, just to let you know, like this thing's not going to happen. You might want to move that to something else or, you know, whatever. So, and that was how I learned that like, oh, that game's not going to happen. And that might have been, I'm just looking through our list and stuff and thinking back, that might have been the first time I can remember like a game being canceled, like as a kid too. So, because it just was like, oh, because that era, that's one of the first games I had reserved.
I think the first time I remember a game being canceled was Star Fox 2.
Okay.
Because I love Star Fox, and I was very big into the Super Nintendo one, especially the 64 one. But I remember reading stuff about Star Fox 2 and just being like, hell yeah, Star Fox 2. And then eventually that was it was over. Yeah. But then they were like, well, we're making Star Fox 64 anyway. And I was like, oh, then I don't really give a shit about Star Fox 2. Like, that's fine.
I mean, but I remember like up until that era, like I wasn't allowed as a kid to buy many video games. So a lot of that would either have been, gifts or something. The first game I ever reserved was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. More because I was already going to get it for my birthday because it came out around my birthday. Mm-hmm. But it was also like the biggest no-brainer thing of all time. Where I was like, yeah, I'm going to get Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. like why wouldn't I? But then that would have been the first game I ever reserved. And then there would have beenip Dark, Majora's Mask, and then Resurrection. All around the same era. So, in fact,
I never pre-ordered anything before I started working at Game Crazy.
Interesting.
Yeah, just never. It never really came up. Again, I like you. I wasn't the kind of kid who just like we just bought video games. It was,
Yeah.
I had to get them or earn them or buy them
But
myself.
this was the beginning of the era where it was like, okay, you can mow the lawn and earn money to
Stuff's
buy
a big
game.
deal.
Yeah. So that was when it was like, okay, if this is what you want to do, you can go reserve it. Like they didn't care at that point, but before that, no. Anytime I would go and ask or be like, hey, I really like this game, like the biggest one of all time ever, GoldenEye. Like so I made it a point to rent that game as many times as I did to just prove to my dad, like, you should have just bought this.
My dad was very much like a movie guy, so we were renting stuff constantly. So which is why we never bought games.
Every weekend.
Yeah, we were there every week, and it was especially because the Hollywood Video with the Blockbuster was already there, but then the Hollywood Video opened like down the street from our house. It was just like every Friday, like I'm going to Hollywood. You want to come with? Fuck yeah, of course.
Yeah, hell yeah.
And then just browse for shit, and that's where I rented all my Dreamcast stuff.
There you go.
Shenmue. That's where I first played it. Renting it from fucking Hollywood Video. And then after that, I was like, I gotta buy this fucking.
But yeah, Resurrection is a bummer. The game looked cool. The one thing that is neat about this one is we got leaked footage of it, like about a year ago, year and a half, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
An actual playable demo you can play. It's not very good.
Well, I mean,
like not a lot to do in it, but it was a very interesting looking Castlevania.
Was it 3D?
Game. Yes.
Yeah.
That was why I was excited, because I was coming off of, as a kid, really liking Castlevania 64, but being like, boy, that game looks like shit compared to this.
It took that series a very long time to translate into 3D into a playable form.
I'd say Lament of Innocence was the first one for me that I thought was good. And then I thought they took a step back with Curse of Darkness for 3D, because the camera.
Were weird games. The camera was bad.
But I
remember trying to play it and just being like, oh shit.
It sucks. I did it on a live stream, I think, a couple Horror Fests ago, and it just I didn't finish it because the camera's terrible.
I just remember like you'd go into like a room in the castle, but the camera would be like up behind you.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't fucking see what's in the room. How does this make any sense?
Yeah, Lords of Shadow, I would say, was where they perfected like being in the 3D.
They actually
but
fixed it.
I adore that first game, and then
that first game's really good. I've played
the second game's whatever.
I never played it.
Yeah.
It's
I think by that time I knew you, and it was like, I don't think I need to play this.
It's because the first game has an incredible twist at the end that they never did a good job of making good on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because
isn't that where like he wakes up in the present day or something?
So the first, I mean, this is spoilers for a 15-year-old game, but the whole thing about that game is you're the first Belmont and you become Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
You don't fight Dracula in the first game. So at the end of that game, you become Dracula. So the last cutscene, it's in the present day, and you have like that other guy that was with you, Zobek, who was, Patrick Stewart did his voice. And that's the whole thing, is like, it's like in this like weird castle, and then he floats up or whatever, and then he meets him in the present day, and you realize like, oh shit, you became Dracula. And then there's that big thing where he kicks him out the glass window, and his robe comes off, and he's wearing a suit, and it's just like present day, and you're like, what is happening? Really cool setup that they don't make good of on that second game. So, because you play as Dracula in the second game and as him, and that's awesome, but the rest of it is not very good. So, it's a bummer, because that first game is really something. So, what about you, Matt? It's your final number one.
So it's trash. It's nothing exciting, but the only reason I put this down is because I remember my mom and dad were like really into this show. Like my dad would watch it all the time. So I'm not saying that it would have been a great game by any means necessary.
Yeah,
but just the show was wild. So I mean, the game had to be
the show
somewhat. But yeah, the world's scariest police chases. Again, not going to be a fantastic game by any means necessary. Not going to be like the star game of whenever this was scheduled. 2001 is when the release was scheduled. But I think it would have been interesting. I think it would have been fun. I think it would have been chaotic and crazy as well. So, I mean, it's something we'll never see again. But
it would have been
it's
PS1
cool.
era, right?
Yeah, PS1.
Okay, that's what I thought. So that was a 90s show.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I feel like that would have been something that I would have sat and watched with my grandma, along with Unsolved Mysteries and Cops and like all those shows of that era, because they all were aired on like the same night.
Exactly.
That was your classic block of old people shows, but I liked it.
Yeah, my parents were old and they
Yeah.
loved Cops. Like my dad used to religiously watch Cops like
Mhm.
crazy. So it was just one of those things where like when this series came, like when my dad found True TV and was like into like all of that, he was gone, game over. Like
There you
he wasn't watching anything else. But
It's a good number one.
Yeah.
We can end on that.
Can I do one last honorable mention one that
Yeah.
I just thought of?
Go
And
for it.
I know you'll like it too, Kyle.
Yeah.
Remember, and the only reason I thought about this is because something else is going to happen soon. But you remember they were making Elder Scrolls for PSP.
Yes.
Remember?
I do remember
it
that.
was basically going to be
Mhm.
like a version of Oblivion for PSP, and that got so far
They
as to like
were
there was screenshots, there was a trailer,
Mhm.
like this was like a thing that was close.
They had a version of that running on like some Nokia phone too.
Yeah,
in that
and
era.
I remember thinking because I was big on the PSP. I thought the PSP was really cool.
Yeah.
Compared to the DS, I always thought the DS was better because it was more of like a fun and like innovative system you could do. But the PSP
sure.
was cooler because it had the ability to, yeah, man, we could probably get a PS2 game to work on this system, kind of thing. So when they said that they were going to put Elder Scrolls on there, you're like, holy shit, I can't believe they're going to cram this thing on. There's no way this can work, right? And it turns out it couldn't. But
Be a good one though.
that would have been such a cool game. Like, you want to talk about a game that would have sold a lot of copies for that PSP?
It would have just because of hey, I
Fuck,
can
dude.
play this on the go.
Yeah, that would have blown up.
oh, for sure.
I mean, Skyrim sold a lot on the Switch when it came out.
Yeah, even though it's not
just
a
for that
good
reason.
version of it, but
It's not a great version of that
No.
game.
but I just thought about that. For obvious reasons, for other things that are going
It's a
on
good
right
one,
now
though.
as we're recording this. But
Yeah.
I remember that. I remember seeing screenshots and just being like, I would totally play. I'm not even a big Oblivion guy, but some reason like playing it on the PSP sounds good. Could have been fun.
It'd be fun.
I
mean,
just don't know.
definitely.
I don't know how that system could have handled it. Like, it could not have been a real
Yeah,
Oblivion
not
just
at
because
all.
of
No.
the systems in that game. But
For sure.
cool.
But yeah, no, that will do our list. And you can always write in about any cancel games you want to talk about to the regular podcast, and that'd be at podcast572@gmail.com. This will go up as an audio on the podcast feed as well. So but otherwise we'll be back again at some point for another edition of the podcast. Thank you for listening or watching.
Thank you, everyone.
Be safe.